I let the love of my life walk away, a confession. A first-person life story, Chapter 1. The setup. I wish I had said something that morning. Every day starts this way. Before coffee. Before the light seeps through the corners of the curtains. Before I remember that the house should be quiet. That one sentence finds me in the dark and sits in my chest like a stone I can't lift. I'm 63 years old, and for longer than I care to remember, I've been waking up to that sentence. My name is David Callahan. I live alone in a 2-bedroom house on Ridgemont Avenue in Dayton, Ohio, about 4 blocks east of the elementary school I attended as a child. The house isn't particularly remarkable. White vinyl siding, cracked down the middle, and a driveway I've been meaning to fix for 6 years. There's a cherry tree in the front yard that blooms every April, and sometimes I sit at the kitchen window drinking my coffee, looking at it, thinking that at least something here still knows how to be beautiful. I bought this house in 2009, after my divorce and after moving from Portland. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, a year, maybe 2, enough time to plan the next chapter. But years pile up when you're not paying attention, and before you know it, you've been sitting at the same kitchen table, in the same chair, looking at the same backyard for 14 years, drinking coffee from a handleless mug you broke 2 years ago and never bothered to replace. I can't sleep well anymore. I haven't been able to for years. At 55, sleep, like so many other things, slipped away from me quietly. Without warning, I lie in bed and listen to the silence of the house. The refrigerator hums. The radiator clicks on and off. A branch from the maple tree behind the house scrapes the gutters when the wind blows, and I know I should cut it, but I never do. Some nights, to be honest, it's my closest friend. My mornings are all the same. I get up around 5:30, sometimes earlier if the ache in my lower back decides to be loud about it. I make coffee in the same drip machine I've had since 2011. I pour it into that handleless mug and sit at the kitchen table, a small round thing I bought at a garage sale when I first moved in. And I look out at the backyard while the sky goes from black to gray to that pale, tired blue that winter mornings in Ohio always seem to carry. I don't turn the TV on. I don't check my phone. There's nothing to check. Nobody's texting me at 5:30 in the morning. Nobody's texting me at noon either, if I'm being honest. There's a kind of silence in this house that isn't just the absence of sound. It's the presence of everything that used to be here. The arguments that echoed down the hallway. The laughter that once came from a kitchen that had people in it. The phone calls that used to ring at odd hours. My mother, my brother, old friends from college, all of that is gone now. What's left is this deep, permanent quiet that feels like it's part of the walls. I eat the same breakfast every morning. 2 pieces of toast with butter, sometimes a banana if I remembered to buy them. I do my dishes right away because there's no reason to leave them. There's nobody else making a mess. I wipe down the counter. I fold the dish towel. And then I stand there in the middle of my kitchen and I don't know what to do with the next 14 hours. That's the part nobody tells you about growing old in America. It's not the aches, it's not the pills lined up on the bathroom shelf. It's not even the money, though that's tight enough. It's the hours, the sheer volume of hours in a day when nobody needs you, nobody's expecting you, and nobody would notice if you just stayed in bed until Tuesday. I go for walks sometimes, down Ridgemont to the corner, then left on Burkhart, past the barbershop that used to be a hardware store. Past the gas station where I once got a flat tire in 1987. And a stranger named Lou helped me change it while his wife waited in the car with a sleeping baby. I remember that. I remember Lou's hands, oil-stained, steady. I remember the baby in the back seat. I don't remember what I had for dinner last Thursday, but I remember Lou. That's what happens when you get to be my age. The past gets sharper, the present gets blurry, and the future, well, the future is just a word for the time you've got left, and you try not to think about how much of it there is, because the answer is probably less than you'd like and more than you deserve. I retired 3 years ago from Emerson Manufacturing, where I worked as a plant supervisor for 22 years. They gave me a plaque and a handshake and a sheet cake from Kroger that said, "Happy Retirement, David," in blue frosting. 14 people signed a card. I kept the card in my desk drawer for a while, but I don't know where it is now. Probably in a box somewhere. Probably in the basement with everything else I don't look at anymore. Retirement was supposed to be the reward. That's what they tell you your whole working life. Put in your time, save what you can, and one day you'll get to relax. But nobody tells you that relaxation, when it's permanent, starts to feel a lot like abandonment. Nobody tells you that the silence of a free afternoon is different from the silence of a free decade. I have a daughter. Her name is Claire. She lives in Charlotte with her husband Marcus, and their 2 kids, Lily, who's 9, and Sam, who's 6. Claire calls me every other Sunday, sometimes every 3rd Sunday, and we talk for about 12 minutes. She asks how I'm doing. I say fine. She tells me about the kids. I say that's great. She says we should visit soon. I say I'd like that. And then we hang up, and I sit there holding the phone for a minute, and I think about how 12 minutes is both everything and nothing at the same time. I don't blame Claire. She has her own life. She has soccer practices and school conferences, and a husband who works too much, and a house that always needs something. She's busy in the way that young people are busy, urgently, constantly, with the belief that there will always be more time later. I was the same way once. I know how it goes. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is doing its settling thing and the branch is scraping and the refrigerator is humming its one sad note, I think about all the people who used to be in my life. I think about my mother who died in 2016. I think about my brother Tom who moved to Tucson and calls me on my birthday and Christmas, and that's about it. I think about the guys I used to work with, Ray and Dennis and Jim, who I swore I'd stay in touch with after retirement, and I did for about 6 months. And then I didn't. And I think about Margaret. I always think about Margaret. She's the reason I'm sitting here. She's the reason the house feels the way it does. She's the reason I wake up every morning with that sentence pressing on my chest like a hand I can't push away. I wish I had said something that morning. I'll get to that. I'll tell you all of it, but first, you need to understand something about who I was, because the man I am now, this quiet, slow, slightly overweight guy in a house that smells like coffee and old carpet, he's not the man who made the decision. The man who made the decision was younger. He was ambitious. He was certain. He had plans and timelines and a 5-year strategy he'd written on a yellow legal pad and taped to the inside of his closet door. That man thought he knew exactly what he was doing. He was wrong. He was so completely, irreversibly wrong that sometimes, even now, I have to sit down when I think about it. I have to put my hands on the table and breathe, because the weight of that wrongness is the heaviest thing I've ever carried, and I've been carrying it for 31 years. People talk about old age regrets like they're philosophical, like it's something you ponder over tea while watching the sunset. But that's not how it works. Regret at my age isn't a thought. It's a physical thing. It lives in my body. It's in my shoulders and my jaw and the space behind my eyes. It's the first thing I feel when I wake up and the last thing I feel before I fall asleep. And some days, it's the only thing I feel at all. I had the love of my life right in front of me and I let her walk away. Not because I didn't love her, not because she did something wrong, but because I was 29 years old and I thought I had time. I thought I had all the time in the world. I didn't. Nobody does. Chapter 2. The Choice. I met Margaret Avery in the fall of 1991 at a bar called Clancy's on 5th Street in downtown Dayton. I was 29. She was 27. It was a Thursday night, which I remember because I almost didn't go out. I'd been working overtime at the plant. I was still a floor supervisor back then, grinding my way up, and I was tired in that deep, bone-level way that makes you want to do nothing but sit on the couch with a beer and watch whatever's on. But my buddy Ray talked me into it. He said his cousin was in town and a group of people were getting together and it would be good for me to get out. I just ended things with a woman named Sheila, who I'd been dating for about 5 months, and Ray thought I was moping. He wasn't wrong, so I went. I put on a clean shirt and drove to Clancy's and found a seat at the bar and ordered a Bud Light. And I was halfway through it when Margaret walked in with 2 friends I didn't know. I wish I could tell you there was a thunderbolt. That's how people like to describe it. Love at first sight. The whole room disappearing, violins playing somewhere in the distance. But it wasn't like that. She came in, and I noticed her the way you notice anyone. A quick glance, a general impression. Brown hair, pulled back. A green jacket that looked a little too big for her. She was laughing at something one of her friends said, and she had this laugh that wasn't loud, but carried. You could hear it across the room, and it made you want to know what was funny. She ended up sitting 2 stools down from me, and we didn't talk for about 20 minutes. I was watching the Reds game on the TV above the bar. They were losing, as usual. And she was talking to her friends about something work-related. She was a second-grade teacher at Fairview Elementary, which I learned later, but that night, all I knew was that she had opinions about lesson plans, and she wasn't afraid to express them. We started talking because of a song. The jukebox was playing Thunder Road by Springsteen, and she said something to her friend about how it was the best opening line of any song ever written. And I turned and said, without thinking, "You're right, but most people think it's Born to Run." She looked at me, surprised, and then she smiled, and that was it. That was the beginning. We talked for 2 hours that night, about music mostly, then about Dayton and how we'd both grown up within 10 miles of where we were sitting. She'd gone to Centerville High, I'd gone to Wayne. She'd gone to Ohio State, I'd gone to Sinclair Community College for 2 years before dropping out to work full-time. She didn't care about that. She didn't care about any of the things I thought she'd care about. She asked me what I liked to read, and when I told her I'd just finished a John Grisham novel, she didn't make a face. She said she liked Grisham too, especially The Firm. And then she told me she also liked Toni Morrison, and I pretended I'd read Beloved even though I hadn't. I called her the next day. She'd written her number on a napkin, which I'd folded and put in my wallet, and I called her from the phone in my kitchen. This was before everyone had cell phones, at exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, because I'd read somewhere that 6 o'clock was the best time to call someone. She picked up on the third ring, and when I said, "Hey, it's David from last night," she said, "I know, I was hoping you'd call." We went to dinner that Saturday. A place called the Pine Club over on Far Hills Avenue, one of those old Dayton steakhouses with the dark wood and the leather booths, and the kind of menu that hasn't changed since 1965. I remember I ordered the strip steak, and she ordered the salmon, and she said it was the best salmon she'd ever had, and I believed her because of the way she closed her eyes on the first bite, like she was trying to memorize the taste. We dated for 2 years. I need you to understand what those 2 years were like, because if I rush through them, you won't understand what I gave up. You won't feel it. Margaret was the kind of person who made the world feel manageable. I don't mean she was simple, or easy, or uncomplicated. She was plenty complicated. She had a temper, especially when she was tired. She could go quiet for hours when something bothered her, and it took me months to learn that her silences weren't punishment, they were processing. She cried at movies, but never at funerals. She kept a journal in a spiral notebook that she wrote in every night before bed, and she never let me read it, not once, and I respected that, even though I was curious enough to peek. But she had this way of looking at life that made me feel like things were going to be okay when I'd come home from a bad day at the plant, and there were a lot of bad days, because I was young and ambitious, and the guys above me didn't care about either. Margaret would listen. She wouldn't try to fix it. She wouldn't say, "It'll be fine," or "Just be patient." She'd sit across from me at whatever table we were at, and she'd say, "Tell me all of it, don't leave anything out." And I'd tell her, and by the time I was done, the weight would be lighter, not gone, but lighter, and that's something. We spent Sundays together, always. That was our day. We'd sleep in, make pancakes. She liked hers with blueberries. I liked mine plain. And then we'd drive somewhere. The Hocking Hills, Yellow Springs, sometimes just out along Route 35 with no destination, windows down if the weather was right, talking about everything and nothing. She loved the way southern Ohio looked in October, when the trees turned and the hills looked like they were on fire. She'd roll down the window and stick her arm out and let the air rush over her hand, and she'd close her eyes, and I'd look at her and think, this is it. This is what people write songs about. Lee liked to describe it. Love at first sight, the whole room disappearing, violins playing somewhere in the distance. But it wasn't like that. She came in, and I noticed her the way you notice anyone. A quick glance, a general impression. Brown hair, pulled back. A green jacket that looked a little too big for her. She was laughing at something one of her friends said, and she had this laugh that wasn't loud, but carried. You could hear it across the room, and it made you want to know what was funny. She ended up sitting 2 stools down from me, and we didn't talk for about 20 minutes. I was watching the Reds game on the TV above the bar. They were losing as usual, and she was talking to her friends about something work-related. She was a second-grade teacher at Fairview Elementary, which I learned later, but that night, all I knew was that she had opinions about lesson plans, and she wasn't afraid to express them. We started talking because of a song. The jukebox was playing Thunder Road by Springsteen, And she said something to her friend about how it was the best opening line of any song ever written. And I turned and said, without thinking, "You're right, but most people think it's Born to Run." She looked at me, surprised, and then she smiled, and that was it. That was the beginning. We talked for 2 hours that night. About music, mostly. Then about Dayton and how we'd both grown up within 10 miles of where we were sitting. She'd gone to Centerville High. I'd gone to Wayne. She'd gone to Ohio State. I'd gone to Sinclair Community College for 2 years before dropping out to work full-time. She didn't care about that. She didn't care about any of the things I thought she'd care about. She asked me what I liked to read, and when I told her I'd just finished a John Grisham novel, she didn't make a face. She said she liked Grisham too, especially The Firm. And then she told me she also liked Toni Morrison, and I pretended I'd read Beloved, even though I hadn't. I called her the next day. She'd written her number on a napkin, which I'd folded and put in my wallet, and I called her from the phone in my kitchen. This was before everyone had cell phones. At exactly 6 o'clock in the evening, because I'd read somewhere that 6 o'clock was the best time to call someone. She picked up on the third ring, and when I said, "Hey, it's David from last night," she said, "I know. I was hoping you'd call." We went to dinner that Saturday. A place called the Pine Club over on Far Hills Avenue. One of those old Dayton steakhouses with the dark wood and the leather booths and the kind of menu that hasn't changed since 1965. I remember I ordered the strip steak and she ordered the salmon, and she said it was the best salmon she'd ever had. And I believed her because of the way she closed her eyes on the first bite, like she was trying to memorize the taste. We dated for 2 years. I need you to understand what those 2 years were like, because if I rush through them, you won't understand what I gave up. You won't feel it. Margaret was the kind of person who made the world feel manageable. I don't mean she was simple or easy or uncomplicated. She was plenty complicated. She had a temper, especially when she was tired. She could go quiet for hours when something bothered her, and it took me months to learn that her silences weren't punishment. They were processing. She cried at movies, but never at funerals. She kept a journal and a spiral notebook that she wrote in every night before bed, and she never let me read it, not once, and I respected that, even though I was curious enough to peek. But she had this way of looking at life that made me feel like things were going to be okay. When I'd come home from a bad day at the plant, and there were a lot of bad days, because I was young and ambitious, and the guys above me didn't care about either, Margaret would listen. She wouldn't try to fix it. She wouldn't say, "It'll be fine," or "Just be patient." She'd sit across from me at whatever table we were at, and she'd say, "Tell me all of it. Don't leave anything out." And I'd tell her, and by the time I was done, the weight would be lighter, not gone, but lighter. And that's something. We spent Sundays together, always. That was our day. We'd sleep in, make pancakes. She liked hers with blueberries, I liked mine plain. And then we'd drive somewhere. The Hocking Hills, Yellow Springs, sometimes just out along Route 35 with no destination, windows down if the weather was right, talking about everything and nothing. She loved the way Southern Ohio looked in October, when the trees turned and the hills looked like they were on fire. She'd roll down the window and stick her arm out and let the air rush over her hand, and she'd close her eyes. And I'd look at her and think, this is it. This is what people write songs about. It was a Wednesday night. We were at her apartment. She'd made spaghetti, her sauce from scratch with garlic bread that she always burned slightly on the bottom. We were sitting at her small kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg that I kept saying I'd fix and never did. And I said, "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something." She put down her fork. She looked at me, and she waited. I told her everything, the company, the position, the money, Portland, all of it. I laid it out like a case, like I was presenting to a board of directors, because that's how I'd rehearsed it in my head. I had numbers, I had timelines, I had a plan for how we'd make it work. She could find a teaching job out there. We'd get a place together. It would be an adventure, a fresh start. She listened to all of it without interrupting. She didn't touch her food. She just sat there with her hands in her lap, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something quieter, like she was watching a thing she'd been afraid of finally arrive. When I finished, the kitchen was silent except for the radiator. Then she said, "How long have you known about this?" I said, "A couple of weeks." She nodded slowly. And you've already interviewed? Twice. Phone interviews. She looked down at the table. You already decided, haven't you? I said, No, I haven't decided anything. That's why I'm telling you. But she knew. She knew me better than anyone. She could see it in my eyes, in the way I'd organized my pitch, in the way I'd waited until I had all the details before telling her. She knew that I hadn't come to discuss it. I'd come to deliver it. David, she said, and her voice was steady, which was worse than if she'd yelled. I love you. You know that, but I'm not going to Portland. I started to argue. I started to talk about opportunity and growth and how this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing, and she let me talk, and when I was done, she said it again, more quietly this time. I'm not going to Portland. Why? I asked, even though I knew, even though I'd known before I opened my mouth. Because this is my home, she said. My kids, my students. They need me. My mother is 15 minutes away. My life is here. I built it here, David. I can't just pack it into a box and ship it across the country because someone's offering you more money. It's not just money, I said. It's my career. It's everything I've been working for. She looked at me then, and I saw it. The first crack. The first sign that this conversation was going to break something. And what about what we've been building? Doesn't that count? I should have said yes. I should have put my hand over hers and said, You're right. You're more important than any job. I'll turn it down. I'll stay. That's what the right answer was. That's what I know now, sitting in this kitchen 31 years later, staring at a dogwood tree through a dirty window. But I didn't say that. I said, Margaret, I can't stay here forever. I can't just be a floor supervisor in Dayton, Ohio for the rest of my life. I have to do something with myself. The crack widened. I watched it happen in real time. Something shifted behind her eyes, and I saw the exact moment she understood that I had weighed her against a job offer, and the job offer had won. She didn't cry that night. She didn't yell. She stood up from the table and took her plate to the sink and rinsed it. And then she turned around and leaned against the counter and crossed her arms and said, Then I think you should go. Margaret. No, David, I'm serious. If this is what you need, then go. I'm not going to be the person who holds you back. I won't do that, but I'm also not going to pretend that this doesn't hurt, because it does. We stood there for a long time, in that tiny kitchen, with the burned garlic bread still on the counter, and the radiator clanking away like it always did. And the distance between us was already growing, even though we were only 6 feet apart. I left her apartment that night around 10. She walked me to the door, and I kissed her on the forehead, and she let me. But she didn't lean into it the way she usually did. She just stood there with her hand on the door frame and watched me walk to my car. I turned around once, at the bottom of the steps. She was still in the doorway, backlit by the yellow light from the hallway. I almost said something. I almost turned around and went back and told her I'd been stupid, that I didn't need Portland, that I didn't need anything except her. But I didn't. I got in my car and I drove home. And 3 weeks later, I accepted the job and moved to Portland, Oregon. That was the moment. That was the decision, not the phone call from the recruiter, not the interviews, not the day I signed the offer letter. It was that night, in her kitchen, when she said, I think you should go. And I didn't say I'd rather stay. That's the moment I let the love of my life walk away. Or, more accurately, that's the moment I walked away from her. Margaret and I tried to stay together for a few months after I moved. Long distance. We called each other every night at first, then every other night, then twice a week. The calls got shorter. The silences got longer. There's only so many times you can say, I miss you, before it starts to sound like an accusation. She flew out to visit me once in August. I picked her up at the Portland airport and we hugged, and it felt like hugging a memory. She stayed for a long weekend. We drove to the coast. We walked on Cannon Beach. I showed her my apartment, which was nice, nicer than anything I'd ever lived in. And she said it was great, but I could see her looking out the window at the unfamiliar streets and the gray sky and the rain, and I knew she was thinking about Ohio. On her last night, we lay in bed in the dark, and she said, I can't do this, David. I said, I know. And that was it. No big fight, no dramatic ending, just two people lying in the dark, 3,000 miles from where they'd fallen in love, telling the truth. She flew home the next morning. I drove her to the airport. She kissed me on the cheek. Not the forehead, not the lips, the cheek, which felt like a specific choice. And she said, "Take care of yourself, David." And she walked through the terminal doors without looking back. I sat in the airport parking lot for 45 minutes after she left. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the terminal, thinking that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. But I didn't go after her. I went back to my apartment. I unpacked my briefcase, and I went to work the next morning because that's what I did. That's what I'd chosen. And the machinery of my new life swallowed me whole. Chapter 3. The Cost. Portland was good to me. On paper, at least. I threw myself into the job. The way a man throws himself into a river, head first, without thinking, hoping the current would carry him somewhere worth going. And for a while, it did. Pacific Northwest processing was growing fast, and I was part of the growth. I worked 60-hour weeks. I learned operations inside and out. I impressed the right people, said the right things at the right meetings, stayed late when everyone else went home. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior operations manager. Within 5, I was running the entire facility. The money was real. For the first time in my life, I wasn't checking my bank account before buying groceries. I bought a truck, a brand new Ford F-150, dark green, with leather seats and a CD player. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the Pearl District, with exposed brick and a view of the Willamette River. I ate at restaurants where you needed a reservation. I bought clothes that weren't from Kmart. I felt like I was becoming someone. But here's what nobody tells you about success. It fills your calendar, not your life. You can be busy every hour of every day and still feel empty when you turn off the lights. The promotions, the bonuses, the handshakes from the CEO. They felt good in the moment, the way a drink feels good on a Friday night. But they didn't last. By Monday, I was hungry again, chasing the next thing and the thing after that, because I had learned, without realizing it, to use ambition as a substitute for connection. I dated in Portland. Of course I did. I was in my early 30s, making good money, in a city full of young professionals. I went out with a woman named Rachel for about 4 months. She was a marketing manager, smart and funny and attractive, and she was perfectly fine, and I ended it because she wasn't Margaret. Then there was Laura, who lasted 6 months. Then Kim, who lasted almost a year. Each one was a decent person. Each one deserved better than what I gave them, which was a man who was physically present and emotionally somewhere in Ohio. I met Sandra in 1997. She was a logistics coordinator at a company we partnered with, and she was everything that Margaret wasn't, which at the time I thought was a good thing. Sandra was ambitious. She talked about career goals and 5-year plans and investment strategies. She didn't want to stay in one place. She wanted to move, to climb, to build something impressive. She understood the long hours. She understood the missed dinners. She understood because she was doing the same thing. We got married in 1999, at a small ceremony at a winery outside Portland. My mother flew out. My brother came, a few friends from work. It was a nice wedding. Sandra wore a blue dress, not white, because she said white was traditional, and she wasn't traditional. And I wore a charcoal suit, and we stood under an arbor covered in white flowers and said our vows, and I meant every word, or at least I thought I did. Claire was born in 2001, my daughter, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, born at Providence Portland Medical Center on a Tuesday afternoon in March. When the nurse put her in my arms for the first time, I felt something crack open inside me. Not break, crack open, like a seed splitting to let something grow. I looked at that tiny face and I thought, okay, this is why I'm here. This is what it was all for. For a few years it was good. Sandra and I were partners, if not soulmates. We functioned well together. We split the responsibilities. We took turns with Claire. We had a routine that worked, even if it wasn't romantic, even if most of our conversations were about schedules and budgets, and who was picking up the dry cleaning. We bought a house in Lake Oswego, a real house, with a yard and a 2-car garage and a swing set that I assembled over a weekend with a 6-pack and a lot of swearing. From the outside, it looked like the American dream, and I told myself that it was. But Margaret was always there, not in a dramatic way, not like a ghost haunting a hallway, more like a song stuck in your head that you can't quite place. I'd be driving to work, and I'd pass a school, and I'd wonder if she was still teaching. I'd hear Thunder Road on the radio, and I'd turn it off every time because I couldn't listen to it without seeing her face at Clancy's bar, laughing, telling her friend about the best opening line of any song ever written. I'd see blueberries at the grocery store, and I'd stand there in the produce aisle for a full minute, holding a pint of blueberries, thinking about Sunday morning pancakes in a kitchen in Dayton. Sandra noticed. Not the specifics. I never told her about Margaret. Not really. But she noticed the distance. She noticed that I could be sitting right next to her on the couch and be 1,000 miles away. She noticed that when she asked me what I was thinking, I always said nothing, and she knew it wasn't true. "You're somewhere else," she said to me once, maybe around 2004. We were in bed and she was reading and I was staring at the ceiling. "You're always somewhere else, David. Where do you go?" I said, "Nowhere. I'm right here." She looked at me for a long moment and then she went back to her book and neither of us said anything else. But I think she knew. On some level, I think she always knew. The years in Portland ran together after a while. That's how it works when you're living on autopilot. You wake up, you go to work, you come home, you eat dinner, you watch the news, you go to bed, and then you do it again, and the seasons change, and Claire grows up, and you get older, and the face in the bathroom mirror starts looking like your father's, and one day, you realize that a decade has passed, and you can't account for most of it. I was good at my job, I'll give myself that. I was organized, reliable. Fair. My employees respected me. My bosses trusted me. I solved problems. I hit targets. I earned raises and bonuses, and eventually a corner office with a window that looked out at the mountains on clear days. I was the kind of man that other men pointed to as a success. I had the house, the title, the family, the retirement plan. I had everything that was supposed to matter, but I was empty, not depressed. Not in the clinical sense, at least. Just empty, like a house with all the furniture in it but no one living there. I went through the motions. I smiled at the right times. I showed up. But inside, there was this hollow space that I couldn't fill, no matter how many hours I worked or how many zeros were on my paycheck. I started thinking about Margaret more, not less, as the years went on. That's the cruelest part of regret. It doesn't fade, it compounds. When I was 35, I thought about her once a week. By 40, it was every other day. By 45, it was every morning, standing in my kitchen in Lake Oswego, looking out at a yard that was perfectly maintained and completely meaningless, thinking about a woman I'd left behind in Ohio and wondering what she was doing right now, in this exact moment, while I stood here holding a coffee I didn't want. I looked her up once. It was 2006, and the internet was making it easy to find people. I typed her name into a search engine at my desk, at work, feeling guilty and pathetic, and I found a mention of her on a Fairview Elementary School newsletter. She was still teaching. She'd won some kind of district award for excellence in education. There was a small photo, grainy, low resolution, and I stared at it for 10 minutes. She looked older, of course. Her hair was shorter, but she was smiling in the photo, that same wide, unguarded smile, and she looked happy. She looked genuinely happy in a way that I hadn't felt in years. I closed the browser. I didn't reach out. What would I say? "Hi, Margaret. I know I left you 13 years ago because I thought a job in Oregon was more important than our life together, but I just wanted to let you know that I think about you every day, and I'm pretty sure I made the worst decision of my life." I couldn't do that. She'd moved on. She deserved to have moved on, and I had made my bed. Sandra and I started having problems around 2007. Nothing explosive, no affairs, no screaming matches, no dramatic revelations, just a slow, steady erosion. The conversations got shorter. The silences got longer. We started sleeping on opposite sides of the bed, then in separate rooms. She said my snoring kept her up. And it probably did, but we both knew it was more than that. Claire was 6 then, old enough to notice that her parents weren't happy. She didn't say anything. Kids are smart about that. They observe without commenting. But I could see it in her eyes sometimes, that cautious, watchful look that children get when they're trying to figure out if the ground beneath them is stable. I tried. I want you to know that. I tried to be a good husband. I tried to be present. I tried to be the man Sandra thought she married. But I was fighting against something I couldn't name, or wouldn't name, which was the simple, devastating truth that I was in love with someone else and had been for my entire marriage. The divorce happened in 2009. It was the recession, which made everything worse. The housing market collapsed. I lost value on the house. Sandra's company did layoffs, and she took a pay cut. We hired a mediator instead of lawyers because we couldn't afford lawyers, and we sat in a small office in downtown Portland and divided up our life like it was an estate sale. She got the house. I got the truck. We split custody of Claire, alternating weeks. After the divorce, I stayed in Portland for another year, living in a rental apartment near my office, seeing Claire every other week, and trying to pretend that my life hadn't just imploded. But the job didn't feel the same anymore. The ambition that had driven me for 15 years was gone, evaporated, replaced by a fatigue that went deeper than physical tiredness. I was 47 years old, divorced, living alone in an apartment that smelled like cardboard and new carpet, eating takeout at a folding table, and I thought, what was the point? What was the point of all of it? I moved back to Dayton in 2010. It wasn't a triumphant return, it was a retreat. I found the house on Ridgemont Avenue, got rehired at Emerson. My old boss, Carl, was still there and brought me back as a plant supervisor, which is where I'd started 17 years earlier. And I settled into a life that felt like putting on an old coat that didn't quite fit anymore. Sandra moved to Charlotte a year later with Claire, following a new job, and eventually a new husband, Marcus. He's a good man, from what I can tell. He treats Claire well, he treats Sandra well. He does the things I should have done. He shows up, he's present, he pays attention. I don't resent him. I resent myself for making it necessary for him to exist in my daughter's life. Claire was 9 when they moved, old enough to feel the distance, old enough to start the long, slow process of becoming her mother's daughter instead of mine. Not because Sandra turned her against me. She never did that. But because geography has a way of deciding relationships. You can't be a daily presence in your kid's life when you're 800 miles away. You become a voice on the phone, a gift in the mail, a visit every few months that always feels too short and slightly awkward, like you're both trying to remember the choreography to a dance you used to know. And me? I was back in Dayton, back where it all started, back in the town I'd left because I thought it wasn't enough, and every morning I'd drive down the same streets I'd driven as a young man, past the same buildings, past Clancy's Bar, which was now a Thai restaurant, past Fairview Elementary, where Margaret still taught 2nd grade, and I'd grip the steering wheel and stare straight ahead and try not to think about the life I could have had if I'd just said the right words on that Wednesday night in 1993. I thought about calling her, dozens of times, hundreds. I'd pick up the phone and put it down. I'd type her name into the white pages and stare at the number and then close the browser. I'd drive past the school and slow down, just for a second, and then speed up and keep going, because what would I even say? I'm sorry I chose a paycheck over you. I'm sorry I thought ambition was more important than love. I'm sorry I spent 15 years in a city I never loved, married to a woman I never loved the way I loved you, raising a daughter I didn't see enough of, chasing a version of success that turned out to be a dressed-up version of loneliness. You can't say those things, not after 20 years, not when the other person has built a life without you. Not when the only person who deserves to hear it is the one person who's earned the right to never hear from you again. So I didn't call. I didn't write. I didn't stop by. I just lived my quiet life on Ridgemont Avenue, 4 blocks from the school where I went as a boy, less than 2 miles from the woman I'd loved and lost. And I let the years pass, the way old men let years pass, slowly, painfully, one empty morning at a time. The cost of my decision wasn't the divorce. It wasn't the distance from Claire. It wasn't the money I spent, the career I built, or the years I gave to a company that wouldn't remember my name 5 years after I retired. The cost was simpler and more devastating than any of that. The cost was the life I didn't live. The Sunday mornings I didn't have. The pancakes I didn't make. The drives through southern Ohio in October that I didn't take. The children I might have had with Margaret, children who would have grown up in a house full of love and laughter and burned garlic bread and Springsteen on the stereo and a mother who closed her eyes when she tasted something good. The Christmases and the birthdays and the ordinary Tuesday evenings that I traded away for a corner office in a city where it rains 200 days a year. That's the thing about life regrets after 60. They're not abstract. They're not hypothetical. They're specific. They have names and faces and addresses. They're the meals you didn't eat, the hands you didn't hold, the words you didn't say. And they live with you, in your house, in your body, you day, in the silence between the furnace clicking off and the branch scraping the gutter. And they don't leave. And you can't make them leave, because they're not visitors. They're residents. They've been here longer than you have. Chapter 4. The realization. The moment I knew there was no going back happened on a Thursday afternoon in October of 2018. I was 56 years old. I was in the cereal aisle at Kroger, which is about as unglamorous a setting for a life-changing realization as you can get. I was standing there with a box of Cheerios in my hand, looking at the nutrition label. Not because I cared about the nutrition label, but because looking at things was something to do. And my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Ray, my old buddy Ray, the one who dragged me to Clancy's bar that Thursday night in 1991. We'd stayed in touch loosely, in the way that old friends do when they don't live near each other anymore. He'd moved to Columbus years ago, and we texted maybe once a month, usually about the Bengals or the Reds or something one of us saw on the news. The text said, "Hey, did you hear about Margaret Avery? She got married, saw it in the Dayton paper." I stood there in the cereal aisle for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough that a woman with a cart had to say, "Excuse me," twice before I moved out of the way. I looked at the text, and I read it again, and I read it a third time, and something inside me, something that had been holding on, quietly, stubbornly, for 25 years, finally let go. She got married. Of course she did. Of course she found someone. Of course she built a life, a real life, with someone who had the sense to stay. Someone who chose her. Someone who sat across from her at a dinner table and said, "I'm not going anywhere," and meant it. I put the Cheerios back on the shelf. I left my cart in the aisle. I walked out to the parking lot and sat in my truck and stared at the steering wheel. And for the first time in decades, I cried. Not the quiet, controlled kind of crying that men my age allow themselves. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and old and raw. The kind that makes your shoulders shake and your breath come in ragged gasps. I sat in that parking lot for 30 minutes, crying like a man who just realized that the door he'd been hoping to walk back through had finally closed, permanently, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, David, you had 25 years. You could have called. You could have shown up. You could have done something, and you're right, I could have. But I didn't, because I was afraid. Not afraid of Margaret. Never afraid of her. Afraid of what her face would tell me. Afraid of seeing in her eyes the same thing I saw in the bathroom mirror every morning, that I had made a terrible choice, and there was nothing to be done about it. So I waited. And I waited, and I told myself that someday the timing would be right, and then the timing was gone, because she found someone else, and the story was over. After that day at Kroger, something shifted in me. The regret that I'd been carrying, quietly, privately, like a stone in my pocket, became something heavier. It became grief. Not grief for Margaret exactly, because she was alive and happy and married. Grief for the life I'd forfeited. Grief for the version of myself that existed only in the road I didn't take. The years after that were the loneliest of my life. And I say that as a man who's spent a lot of time alone. My mother died in 2016, 2 years before the Kroger moment. Alzheimer's. She'd been in a care facility in Kettering for 3 years, and toward the end, she didn't know who I was. I'd sit by her bed and hold her hand, and she'd look at me with this polite, confused expression, like I was a stranger who'd wandered into her room by mistake. The last time she spoke my name was in 2015, on a Tuesday afternoon. She said, "David, is that you?" And I said, "Yes, Mom, it's me." And she smiled and squeezed my hand. And then the next visit, She was gone again. Shwaya. Not dead, just gone, somewhere inside herself, where I couldn't reach her. She died on a Sunday morning in March. I was there. I was holding her hand. The room smelled like antiseptic and flowers that someone, a nurse probably, had put on the windowsill. She took a breath, and then she didn't take another one. And I sat there for a long time, holding her hand, looking at her face, and I thought about how many phone calls I'd missed over the years, how many Sundays I'd skipped, how many times she'd said, "When are you coming to visit?" And I'd said, "Soon, Mom, soon." And soon turned into months and months, turned into years and years, turned into this. A room, a bed, a hand that was still warm but wouldn't squeeze back. My brother Tom flew in for the funeral. We stood next to each other at the graveside, in our dark suits, and we shook hands with the people who came, and we said the things you say. And then we went to a diner on Patterson Boulevard and sat in a booth and ate sandwiches and didn't talk much. Tom went back to Tucson the next day. We said we'd call more often. We didn't. After Mom died, the phone got quieter. Not all at once, but gradually, the way things always happen. The calls from old coworkers tapered off. The Christmas cards got fewer. The emails slowed to a trickle. I'd check my inbox in the morning and there'd be nothing but spam. Promotions from stores I'd bought something at once 5 years ago, newsletters I didn't remember subscribing to, reminders to renew things I didn't use anymore. My phone became this thing I carried around not because anyone was going to call, but because I was afraid of what it would mean to leave it at home. Like if I left it on the kitchen counter and went for a walk, I'd miss something. But there was nothing to miss. The phone was just a small screen full of silence that I carried in my pocket. I started eating dinner at the same time every night. 5:30, like clockwork. Not because I was hungry at 5:30, but because structure was the only thing keeping me tethered to the day. Without it, the hours would melt together, and I'd find myself standing in the kitchen at 9 o'clock at night, wondering if I'd eaten, unable to remember. The question came to me one night in January of 2022. I was 60 years old. I was sitting in my living room in the chair by the window, watching the snow fall under the streetlight. The house was silent. That deep, permanent silence I mentioned earlier, the kind that feels like it's part of the walls. And a question formed in my mind, not suddenly, but slowly, like something rising from deep water. Who will remember me? Not remember me like a name on a list, not remember me like a face in a photo, but really remember me. Remember the sound of my voice. Remember the way I laugh. Remember the things I said and did and cared about. Who would carry that after I was gone? Claire, maybe. But Claire was in Charlotte, living her own life, raising her own kids. She'd remember me the way children remember distant parents. Fondly, but vaguely, a figure in the background of her childhood, someone she talked to on the phone every other Sunday for 12 minutes. She'd tell Lily and Sam about their grandfather, and they'd nod politely, and I'd become a story, and eventually the story would get shorter, and eventually it would stop being told at all. Tom would remember me, but Tom was 70, and had his own health problems and his own regrets, and we hadn't had a real conversation in years. When one of us died, the other would fly in for the funeral and stand at the graveside and feel the weight of all the calls we didn't make and the visits we didn't take. And then he'd fly home and the remembering would fade slowly, like a photograph left in the sun. And that was it. That was the list. My daughter, who I talked to for 12 minutes every other week. My brother, who called me twice a year. No close friends. No partner. No one who checked in on me daily. No one who would notice if I didn't answer the phone. No one who would show up at my door if I went dark for a week. I had built a life that looked, from the outside, like a life. But from the inside, it was a shell. A well-maintained, properly insured, structurally sound shell, with nothing living inside it. And I knew, sitting there watching the snow, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold, that this was the cost. Not the money, not the career, not the divorce. This emptiness, this silence, this being alone in a house in the town where I grew up, with nobody coming and nobody going, and nobody caring whether the light in my window was on or off. I thought about the men I'd worked with at Emerson, the ones who'd retired before me. Some of them had wives who planned their days. Some of them had grandchildren who visited on weekends. Some of them had church groups, bowling leagues, fishing buddies. They had networks, messy, imperfect. sometimes annoying, but they had people. They had someone to call when the furnace broke. They had someone to sit with at the diner on a Tuesday morning. They had someone who would notice if they weren't there. I didn't have any of that. I'd spent my life chasing things that didn't chase me back. Promotions, titles, money, status. And I'd let the things that would have chased me back, love, family, community, roots, slip through my fingers because I thought there would always be time to come back for them. There wasn't. I think about Margaret. I think about her every single day, still, even now. I think about the life we could have had, the house we might have lived in, not big, not fancy, just ours, the kids we might have raised, the Sundays we might have spent driving through the hills with the windows down, the ordinary, unremarkable, beautiful days that I traded for a corner office and a view of mountains I never climbed. I don't know much about her life now. I know she married a man named Richard, a dentist, from what Ray told me. I know they live somewhere on the south side of Dayton, maybe Centerville or Springboro. I don't look her up anymore. I stopped doing that after the Kroger parking lot. It doesn't help. It just adds detail to a picture I can't be part of. But sometimes, on Sundays, I'll drive, not to see her. I'd never do that. Just to drive, down Route 35, past Yellow Springs, through the same hills that Margaret used to love in October, and I'll roll the window down, even if it's cold, and I'll let the air rush over my hand, and I'll think about her doing the same thing, in the passenger seat of my old car, with her eyes closed, and that smile on her face. And for a few minutes, the emptiness lifts. Not completely, but enough. Enough to remind me that I was capable of love, once. That someone loved me back. That there was a time when the world felt full and warm and possible, and I was too young and too stupid to know that it was the best I'd ever have. That's the realization. That's what end-of-life reflections really look like, when you strip away the poetry and the philosophy and the neat little lessons. It's an old man driving through the hills on a Sunday afternoon, alone, with the window down, trying to feel something he felt 30 years ago, with a woman he let go. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's just sad. Quietly, permanently sad. And the worst part, the part that keeps me up at night, the part that lives in the silence and the ache and the cold coffee and the empty inbox, is that I did this to myself. Nobody did this to me. There was no villain, no tragedy, no twist of fate. There was just a man who had everything he needed and convinced himself he needed more. That man was me, and I have to live with that every morning, every evening, every 12-minute phone call, every empty Sunday, for the rest of whatever time I have left. Chapter 5. The lesson, if you're still listening. And I don't know why you would be, because this isn't the kind of story that makes you feel good. But if you're still here, I want to talk to you, not at you. To you. I'm not going to pretend I have wisdom. Wisdom is a word that old men use to dress up their failures, and I've done enough dressing up for one lifetime. What I have is experience. Painful, specific, irreversible experience. And if any of it can help someone, even one person, even a little bit, then maybe this confession isn't entirely useless. I'm talking to the young ones, the ones who are 25, 30, 35, the ones who are standing where I stood, looking at the same kind of fork in the road, weighing love against ambition, comfort against risk, the person in front of them against the person they think they could become. Here's what I want to say, and I want you to hear it, really hear it, not the way you hear advice from old people, politely, with one ear, while you're already thinking about what you're going to do next. The job will not love you back. I know that sounds obvious. I know you've heard it before, but you haven't felt it yet, and that's the problem. You won't feel it until you're sitting where I'm sitting, in a house that's too quiet, with a phone that doesn't ring, and a list of accomplishments that don't keep you warm at night. You won't feel it until the corner office is empty, and the retirement plaque is in a box in the basement, and the company you gave your best years to has already replaced you with someone younger and cheaper and hungrier. I'm not saying don't work hard. I'm not saying don't have ambition. Ambition is fine. Hard work is fine. But they're not the thing. They're not the point. They're the frame, not the picture. And if you spend your whole life building a beautiful frame and forget to put anything inside it, you'll end up like me, staring at an empty rectangle, wondering where the picture went. Margaret was the picture. She was the Sunday mornings and the blueberry pancakes and the drives through October hills. She was the notes in my jacket pocket, and the laugh that carried across a room, and the woman who said, "Tell me all of it, don't leave anything out," when I had a bad day. She was the thing that made everything else make sense. And I walked away from her because a company in Oregon offered me more money. More money. I want to laugh when I say that, but I can't, because it's not funny. It's the saddest, most pathetic sentence I've ever spoken. I left the love of my life for more money. I left the woman who made the world feel manageable so that I could manage a production facility in a city where it rains 200 days a year. I traded warmth for a paycheck, and I've been cold ever since. If you're young and you're reading this and you have someone in your life who makes the world feel smaller in a good way, someone who makes the noise quieter and the mornings easier and the evenings worth coming home to, hold on to that person. I don't care what else is on the table. I don't care how much money they're offering. I don't care how prestigious the title is, or how impressive the city sounds, or how logical the move seems on paper. Hold on to that person, because I promise you on everything I have left, which isn't much, there is no amount of professional success that will fill the space they leave behind. I know some of you are thinking, but what if the relationship doesn't work out anyway? What if I stay and we break up? What if I give up the opportunity and end up with nothing? And yeah, maybe that happens. But at least you'll know you tried. At least you'll know you chose love over fear. At least you won't be 63 years old, sitting in a kitchen in Ohio, wondering what would have happened if you'd just said the right words on the right night. The not knowing is the worst part. Worse than loss. Worse than failure. The not knowing is a door that never closes, and behind it is every version of your life that you didn't live, and they're all there, playing out in silence, just beyond your reach forever. I want to tell you something about time, too, because I think young people misunderstand it the same way I did. You think you have a lot of it. You think the years stretch out ahead of you like a highway in the desert, endless and straight and full of possibility. And when you're 29, that feels true. But it's not. Time is not a highway. Time is a river, and it's moving faster than you think, and if you're not careful, you'll look up one day and realize you floated past everything that mattered while you were busy steering towards something that didn't. I missed things, so many things. I missed Claire's first steps because I was at a conference in Seattle. I missed her first day of school because I was on a call with a supplier who didn't care about my daughter or my life or anything except whether the shipment would arrive on time. I missed Christmases and birthdays and school plays and soccer games, and each time I told myself it was okay, that I'd make it up later, that there would be more Christmases, and more birthdays and more everything. And there were. But each one was a little smaller, a little more strained, a little more polished with effort and apology, until eventually they stopped feeling like celebrations and started feeling like obligations. Claire doesn't blame me. She's too kind for that. But there's a distance between us that we both feel, and neither of us knows how to close. It's not resentment, it's not anger, it's just the accumulated weight of all the times I wasn't there, pressed down over 2 decades until it hardened into something permanent. We love each other. I know we do. But we love each other the way you love a relative you don't see often. Warmly, genuinely, but from a distance that neither person chose and neither person knows how to bridge. If you're a parent, or if you're going to be one, please hear me. Your kids don't need the bigger house. They don't need the nicer school district. They don't need the vacations, or the gadgets, or the college fund. Though those things are fine. What they need is you. Physically, emotionally, consistently, you. Sitting on the floor playing blocks, standing in the kitchen making dinner while they do homework at the table, being there for the small moments that don't seem important at the time, but turn out to be the only things that matter. I wasn't there. I was in Portland, climbing a ladder to nowhere, and by the time I looked down, everyone I loved was so far below me that I couldn't see their faces anymore. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll stop. I've been talking for a long time, and I know this is heavy. I know it's not the kind of story that ends with a sunrise and a second chance and a lesson that ties everything up in a bow. Life isn't like that. My life isn't like that. This is a story about a man who made a choice and lived with the consequences, and the consequences are still happening every day in the quiet of a house on Ridgemont Avenue. But here's what I want you to take away from it, if you take away anything at all. The people in your life right now. The ones who love you, the ones who show up, the ones who listen when you talk, And remember what you said. They are not a given. They are not a constant. They are not the backdrop to your life. They are your life. Everything else, the career, the money, the status, the ambition, is just the scenery. And scenery changes, scenery fades, scenery gets torn down and replaced. But the people, if you let them, will stay. They will be there in the morning and the evening and the long, quiet stretches in between, and they will fill the house with the kind of noise that you don't appreciate until it's gone. I had that. I had Margaret. I had a woman who loved me in a way that I haven't been loved since, and probably won't be loved again. And I let her go because I thought there was something bigger out there, something better, something more important. There wasn't. There was just Portland, and rain, and a corner office, and a marriage that felt like a business partnership, and a daughter who grew up without me, and a retirement party with a sheet cake and a card signed by 14 people whose names I've already started to forget. And then this house, this silence, this mug with no handle, this old man looking out the window at a dogwood tree, wishing he'd said something different on a Wednesday night in 1993. I wish I had held her hand across that table and said, "I'm staying." I wish I had said, "You are the opportunity." I wish I had said, "There's no job on this earth that is worth losing you." But I didn't, and I can't go back. If I could go back in time, I know exactly where I'd go. I'd go to that kitchen on that Wednesday night with the spaghetti and the burned garlic bread and the wobbly table and the clanking radiator, and I'd look at Margaret Avery and I'd say, "I'm sorry I even brought it up. I'm not going anywhere. Let's finish dinner." But I can't. That's the thing about life. There's no rewind. There's no second take. There's just the one shot, and if you miss it, you spend the rest of your days in the audience, watching the life you could have had play out on a stage you'll never stand on again. So that's my story. That's my deep, personal confession. That's what I carry with me every morning, every evening, every Sunday drive through the hills. I'm 63 years old. I live alone in Dayton, Ohio. I had everything once, and I let it go. And the house is quiet, and the phone doesn't ring, and the dogwood blooms every April, whether I'm watching or not. And that's it. That's all there is. If you're young and you're lucky enough to have someone who makes the world feel like home, don't leave. Don't let them leave. Say the thing you're afraid to say. Make the choice that scares you. Choose the person over the plan. Because the plan will change. The money will come and go. The title will fade. But the person, the right person, is once in a lifetime. And a lifetime, I can tell you now, is shorter than you think. Much, much shorter than you think. End.